So we're really honored to have Professor Robert Merton here tonight. I first met our guest speaker when I was a graduate student at MIT, and I took 2 courses at Harvard. His courses were inspiring, but they had brutal mathematics. But eventually, or every now and then, he would throw in some intuition. I'll give you an example. One class he asked us, suppose you could predict the stock market every month. And when the market would be up, you'd put money in. When it would be down, you would keep money in the cash. How much would $1,000 grow to in 50 years? It turns out, I didn't know the answer, but it was $5.3 billion. Then Professor Merton said, well, now what if you actually did that strategy? There's a way to do that with options. So you buy the options and you can create that strategy. How much would that $1,000 grow to? Turns out, only 21,000. And the reason is the option prices eat up your profits. Our guest speaker was also a curious kid. When he was 11 years old, he became fascinated with cars. He liked to build hot rods. He once bought a Cadillac for $75, rebuilt it, and sold it for a profit before he had a driver's license. He thought he would eventually become an auto engineer, and in college he worked for Ford Motor Company. Now imagine that. If our guest speaker had stayed in auto engineering, we might be celebrating today the first flying car. We're really lucky to have Professor Merton here today. He was involved in one of the most amazing discoveries in finance and economics, option pricing. I know a lot of you have heard of a guy named Albert Einstein. I personally think option pricing was the closest economics and finance has gotten to that. And so the work that Fisher Black, Myron Scholes, and Bob Merton made transformed the financial industry. Every time you hear the word option, future, exotic option, swap, you might be thinking back to what Merton did in the early 70s. Dr. Merton is the School of Management Distinguished Professor of Finance at MIT Sloan School of Management and University Professor Emeritus at Harvard University. He received a PhD in economics from MIT in 1970 and a BS from Columbia University. He is also a resident scientist at Dimensional Fund Advisors. Merton received the Alfred Nobel Memorial Prize in Economic Sciences in 1997 for his work in option pricing theory. Today, Professor Merton will talk to us about how finance can change our future. Could you please give a warm welcome for Dr. Robert Merton?
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I want to thank the Silks for funding this lecture, and therefore I could come tonight, speak with you, and I want to thank all of you for coming. I know you have other things that you could be doing. Well, for this evening, as the title suggests, we're going to try to talk to you about financial innovation and how it might impact you. And by the way, I'm not a slide person. You don't really need to be able to read any of these slides. I don't know why I do it. I sometimes do it because people want a copy later of something I said made them curious, and then they have something they can look at. As far as I'm concerned, if you all want to provide a PDF to anybody electronically from this, you have my permission and it's on tape, okay? But that's the spirit of the slides. I'm going to talk to you. So if I don't get through too many of them, that's not unintended. Okay, so first I want to start out, I think you're all aware, of course, of the big financial events of, it's going to be 10 years next year of the great financial crisis or so forth. And I'm sure you've heard everywhere informed a lot about financial innovation, a lot about finance. I'm not going to get into that, but I will say to you that if you want to think about crises, and I am going to talk a bit about the crises tonight, but not the crisis of 2008 or 2009, but the crisis of 40 years ago in the 1970s, which you probably haven't heard about. For some reason, economists, not finance people, of course, but the other economists, I'm teasing. No, they seem to compare what happened in 2008 or 2009 with the Great Depression. And with all respect, I don't think that's a very good comparison relative to something that's more relevant, which is what happened in the 1970s. I'll try to convince you of that, but I don't want you to think I'm like the two comedians that get up on stage, and they're trying to outdo each other. And one says, well, I had a dirt floor when I was growing up. You said, of course, but at least you had a roof. Well, I'm not going to try to compare these crises, but I'm going to use that crisis to show you some things about finance, show you some things about innovation, show you some things about how a country or governments reacted to crisis that was different. Not better, but different. But I have an intention for doing it that I hope you'll see. Now, if I'm going to take you back 40 years, before I quit, I better say something that's relevant today. So I want to talk about some of the challenges, only one, I don't have time. One of the challenges that we do face, and it's a global challenge, and that's funding retirement. I think we're all aware of that. And I don't care what age you are, because believe it or not, you're going to pay for me. You know what I mean? So don't think this is just a problem for us. But in any case, that is definitely a global challenge. So that's my agenda with you. And I hope you come out of this saying something about finance and something about innovation, and maybe a little different perspective on what you've had from the popular press or what you've been told. Okay, so let's get started. And the first thing I just want to say is, finance is a good, well-functioning financial system is essential for growth and economic development of an economy. There's stories that are told in old macro textbooks about dichotomy. What is that? There's Main Street and Wall Street. There's the real sector and the financial sector. I'm in the Chinese Academy of Sciences on a committee which, when translated back into English, is on the fictitious economy. How'd that happen? Well, if real is Main Street and financial is not real, it must be unreal. Unreal goes into Mandarin, and then someone's looking through a thesaurus to bring unreal back, and that's fictitious. Okay. But in any case, getting back to the theme, in the real world, the financial system and the economic real system, as we call it, are inexorably linked, and you can't separate them. The fact that much of finance is relatively intangible, it's not bricks and mortar, shouldn't surprise anyone, certainly in this part of the world. Which is more valuable many times, the tangible machine or the software in it? Okay, so I don't need to say more. Tangibility is not a test of value, despite the fact that MIT still has that you get a degree in electrical engineering and computer science. You can't just do computer science. But anyway, so reason being is my colleague Robert Solow, many, many years ago, who also received the Nobel Prize for his growth theory work, he demonstrated that economic growth did not come from what people thought was population growth, big population, or from frugality, lots of saving. I mean, those had effects. The biggest effect on growth was technological progress. That was a big thing, and he showed that both as theory but then empirically. That was a big breakthrough in understanding where growth came from. Now, in the labs, I'm going to be provincial. In the labs at MIT, they have some remarkable inventions. I mean, you wouldn't believe this stuff. Yes, you would, because you have a few of that around here too. Okay? But they have this remarkable technology. But if that technology cannot get into broadly the economy, it will never lead to growth. It'll sit there. How does it do that? Well, it really has to get incorporated. Finance is the way in which you get all of this stuff built. And if you don't have a well-functioning financial system, you can't do it. So that's my kind of two-liner, four-liner on this is important, so we better get it right. Now, I said to you what I want to do to show you is I'm going to take you back to the 1970s. And without spending too much time on it, I'm going to say, at least for the United States, because the United States is so important to the world economy, it then hit the rest of the world. We had a series of enormous shocks that hit us all at one time. First, we had the fall of Bretton Woods. For those of you who don't know what that is, from 1944 up until the 70s, currencies were all fixed. You didn't have to think about exchange rates. They were always the same. In fact, nobody knew what the exchange rates were. It didn't mean anything. Suddenly, they were all let loose, and they were all bouncing around, as you see them today. An experience we hadn't had in over a generation. No one had experienced that. That's the first shock. Second one, these are not in order of importance. They're just my random list. We had the first oil shock. Oil went from $2.50 a barrel to $13 a barrel. And we didn't know we had the number, but we had a second one before the decade was over. Okay, what else? Double-digit inflation. Now, I'm looking at this audience. You're a young group. Of course, from my perspective, most everybody is. But I say is you're a young group. And so maybe you don't remember, but actually, you weren't here. We had 10% inflation in the United States. Now, we hadn't seen that since our Civil War in the 19th century. 100 years. There was nobody on the planet who had experienced it in the United States. Okay? So that's a pretty big shock. What else did we have? With 10% inflation, we had 9% unemployment. Now, I just ask you to think. In the last crisis, we had like 9.2, maybe it touched 10 even at one point. Unemployment. What was inflation? Zip. Do you think that the monetary policies of the Fed, the ECB, Japan, could have been followed if we had 10% inflation at the same time? I don't think so. It was a very, very tough time. It's called stagflation. You weren't supposed to have both happen, but they did. And what was cure for one was like, encouraging the other. So, kind of a challenge. What else do we have? The stock market fell 50% in real terms in 18 months. We had double-digit interest rates. That was pretty exciting. Again, we hadn't seen those since the Civil War. And we had a regulation that said banks couldn't pay more than 5%. Now, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out that if you can get full faith and credit government securities, which are tax advantaged, at 10%, you're not going to be putting a lot in the bank at 5%. So we had no housing money. I don't care what kind of credit you were. There was no money for housing. All right, well, I'm not going to belabor all of this. I'm just going to say it was a pretty rough time. A lot of shocks. One thing I caution you always remember if you haven't thought about it, the people that tell stories are the survivors. Always remember that. So it never looks so bad when you look back on it as it was at the time. So they're always saying, oh, this crisis, we got things under control in the past. What they really are telling you is that they survived the past. And if they didn't survive, they don't get up on the stage and tell you. So it's just a little bias to keep in mind when you're listening to these stories. Now, these were the shocks. What was the response? This is the part I wanted to get to. We know in 2008, 2009, the response was cut down on innovation. Innovation's bad. Stop it. Pull Hearns in. Safety, safety, safety. Don't take any chances. Shut these markets down. Do these things. Put all these things up. Block what's going on. That might be the right answer. I'm not here tonight to say it wasn't. I'm just pointing out to you it's not the only answer that you come up with. In fact, we came up with a very different answer in the 1970s. Not to say it was coordinated, but it was supported by the government. To say that we created the reaction to all these risks that had never been seen before, or not in 100 years in some cases, was to build tools, markets, instruments, securities to help us manage those risks. So we created the first options market. An option, if you don't know, put option or call option, is basically financial insurance. It was a way of insuring things like stocks and bonds. Financial futures were created to hedge the risk of currencies which are now raising interest rates and shocks. I mean, think of interest rates at 10%. At one point, at the end of all of this with Mr. Volcker, interest rates in the United States were at 21%. Now, if you're in a construction business and you went into a construction project for 6-year construction project and your interest costs go to 21% or 15%, you're in a lot of trouble. So you understand risk. NASDAQ, the first electronic exchange, money markets, high-yield instruments, index funds. The first index fund, I believe, was done here in Wells Fargo with a fellow named Nick McClown called the Stagecoach Fund. The best-known index funds, certainly retail ones, are Vanguard. That was in 1975. TIA-CREF, International Diversification. TIAA-CREF's a big insurance company. It was founded to look after professors. Okay? No, Mr. Carnegie put that in. He even got a tax break that they never had to pay taxes until, well, we won't go there. Okay. But anyway, what he did is he said, it doesn't make sense just to invest domestically. You should diversify globally. Any of you who go in to get any advice today, I'm just looking, right? 401k, IRA, globally diversify is one of the first things on the list, and it's a good idea. That had never been done before in any big institution until the 70s. We created the modern pension system, ERISA, with all the pension funds. That didn't exist before. May Day is when we got rid of fixed commissions, the cartel, and that opened the doors to institutionalization of the financial system. We had debt security. We created a national mortgage market. Instead of having local S&L funding all the mortgages in growth areas, we created a global base for the funding of mortgages in the United States. And whatever you think about mortgages and all the rest, the facts are there's always been mortgage money ever since then in the U.S. It's been a little tighter or not, maybe the rates change, but there's always been mortgage money. Now, we take that for granted. It was not true before that. These innovations not only address the risks of the times, okay, but they've been paying dividends to society for the last 4 decades, almost 5. They're still there. And if you want any proof that these markets, which are created under stress, big stress, are a good idea, if you look around the world, every developed country and many developing countries have put all these markets in, not under duress, by choice. So unless you think the world is filled with nothing but masochists running their country who want to import bad stuff into their country, I think that's serious evidence that you might want to take a different view on that when you hear that perspective. Now, the other one I want to mention is sort of interesting. The interest rate swap, which it's easy to explain, but I won't take time. But it allowed banks, good banks doing what their clients, working for their clients, to get rid of the biggest risk that was in the banks, which was not credit risk, it was interest rate risk. Depositors wanted their money anytime they wanted, so they were lending money short. And borrowers, you could understand with 10% interest rates, whether it's for construction, mortgages, businesses, wanted to lock in their rates so that they wouldn't go bankrupt. The problem was that meant the bank had an enormous exposure to interest rates by meeting the two clients, and they were routinely going not bankrupt, they were going insolvent. Government kept them from going bankrupt. Overnight, one contract, a very simple one, simple to explain, but very big and complicated to implement and scale. But it's like 600 trillion US in interest rate swaps around the world today. So it's a big number. Overnight, that took the biggest risk out of every bank in the world, and forever. Today, JP Morgan, Bank of America, if interest rates go up, you have no idea what the impact will be in them. They have the choice of completely controlling their exposure to that risk. I'll go through all of this to get across to you, first, the reaction, but how big this wave of innovation was. And unlike sometimes when you get in a crisis, you do bad stuff. Bad stuff means like there's a fire, you break windows and doors to save the place, but then you have a mess afterwards. These innovations not only dealt with the times, they lasted, and they've been producing that. And these innovations have been going on. I could spend the rest of the evening, and I'm already running probably short on time, on that. But I wanted you to see out of this, one, how important things that you take for granted, and should take for granted, they weren't always here. They were created a relatively short time ago. Now, how do I relate this to finance science? And the relation to finance science is, first of all, finance wasn't a science before 1950s, but it became a real science, and I mean a real science, in the 50s and 60s. But one of the things about finance that no other branch of economics, or even for that matter, most of the social sciences, any of the social sciences, have that's very different, is the most advanced research, empirical, theoretical, technological, that's done in finance, and it's a very high-tech kind of thing, actually is used in mainstream practice. And that integration of finance practice with finance science, this is when it happened. Because none of these innovations could have been done, none of them, without the finance science quantitative models, computer models, theories, and everything had been developed in the 50s and the 60s. And then, and this is, it's always better to be lucky than smart. In the introduction, they said, we did our work on option pricing because we found it interesting. We thought it was practical. I mean, it was option, but it was a fairly esoteric thing, and there wasn't even an options market when we did the work, okay? But because we did the work when we did it, had we done it 10 years earlier, it would have just been published, maybe, and that would have been it. But we did it when we did it, precisely when there was a huge need. They created an options market, but no one knew how to price them or figure out the risk. And nobody had any experience. And we were just lucky enough to come up with an answer at just the right time. And so something conceived in theory, worked out mathematically and everything else. Within 2 years, everybody in the world involved in these things were using it. Okay? Texas Instruments even made a special calculator. That would do the calculations for the people on the floor. Had a little thing that would put the things in there. My colleague Myron, who's a character, as was Fisher Black, bless his soul. Myron called them up, we were in our 20s, and said to them, well, shouldn't we get a royalty or something for this? He said, no, you guys put it in the public. Yeah, of course, we published it. We had no intention of keeping it private. Okay? He said, okay, can we get a free calculator? They said, no. That's life. What can I tell you? That's a true story. Anyway, all right. So what I was saying is all these things we've listed up here, and I could spend time on that, but the first big databases were created in the 60s, but these models that were built and the experience we have with them were the only way that all this innovation got done. And so it was a need that drove bringing together the science and the practice. And that's been the continuing practice ever since. So that's the history. How much time do I have left? Is there someone up there with a 10-minute? 15 minutes. Well, I'm doing better than I thought. Okay, thank you. All right. So now I want to bring you up to 2017 because, if I stay in history, you're going to say, oh, that was interesting. Okay. But I hope you understand why I took you back because this is very relevant to what's happening today. And this is a very exciting field. And it's happening around the world. By the way, finance is totally global. I can go anywhere and we're doing it and do. And that's also very important. Because when we talk about policies and so forth, we should understand, even 25 years ago, you could move everything, whole businesses, whole markets and everything. Today, it can be anywhere. And it is. And so that's there. But what I want to talk about now is retirement. I'm not going to go through all the things. I don't think it's explained to you. But I do want to mention a couple of things. Why is there a crisis in retirement funding? Where did that come from? Well, part of it is our legacy. I won't go into here of certain of our pension systems not funding themselves. But that's important, but that's not the main story. The main story is that, first of all, demographics. People have gotten older, and we have to take care of them, okay? But the other one, and I'm looking at you out there, that's you, all of you, okay? You're going to live longer. That's your good news. What's the little more on good news? Almost everything good, everything nice has some dysfunctional, has some cost. There are very few free things in life. And so here, look, make it simple. If your parents or grandparents work from 25 to 65 and on average live 10 years, then simple. If you want to live at the same level your whole life, that's Modigliani's life cycle, which is a reasonable thing, okay? Then you have to fund 50 years of consumption out of 40 years of work, right? Pretty easy. Now I tell you you're going to live 10 years longer. And you tell me you want to work the same number of years as your parents. Okay, fine. That means you work 40 years, but now you've got to fund 60 years of consumption. The arithmetic's equally simple. If your parents had to save 20%, right? You pay for 50 with 40. How much do you have to do now? The arithmetic's equally simple. A third, 33%, because now that's what if you want to do the same as your parents. If leave aside any change in standard of living, if your parents were making 100, that means they saved 20, they lived at 80. If you save 33 and make 100, you're going to live at 67. Is that bad? Well, it's lower than your parents lived at, but of course you get 20 years off of retirement. So that may not be bad, but that's a reality. At the other extreme, if you say to me, I want to live the same as my parents, I'm not going to take a cut in the economic standard of living, I say, fine. The arithmetic's easy. Your parents saved 20%, they consumed 80. You saved 20%. How many years can you pay for? 20% of 60 is 12. So you could have 12 years of retirement. Your parents only had 10. How many years of work? 48 versus 40. Now, that's simple arithmetic. There's a whole bunch of stuff about investment returns. I tell that to you tonight because I'm saying those are the boundaries. Anybody that comes to you with a solution that says you can work the same number of years as parents and live as well as your parents, that doesn't work. Okay? And you say, well, we just earn higher returns on our money. Well, if you ask our sponsor, he's in that business, I believe the people in the industry, every day they work, they're looking to get the highest returns they can for the risk they take. So you can't just dial it up. You can dial up the expected return, but then you dial up the risk. And risk is real. So that's changing the game. But you can't just solve it by returns. Anyway, enough of a speech on that, but I thought I'd at least give you that. So when you're listening to all the chatter, when you hear anyone offering you that you can do the same number of years' work and keep the same standard of living and also live longer, that's one too many. Okay. Anyway, so let me get along to in my last 10 minutes. Is that, 10 minutes? See, am I on you? Hey. All right. So now let me talk about, very briefly, because I have 10 minutes, how you can use financial innovation and finance science to address this problem. And I'll say to you at the outset, we have a political science problem in retirement that needs to be dealt with, and I'm not going to go into that. But in terms of having a way to fund retirement in the future that's sustainable and works, we know how to do that. I didn't say it's easy, but we know how to do it. By that I mean it's an engineering problem, it's not a science problem. And engineering problems can be very complicated, but we know how to do it. It's like building a bridge. You know how to build a bridge. It's very complicated to do, but it can be done. That's my assertion. Now, to back it up a little bit, this is a way of going about the way you design these things. Not in detail, but I'm going to show you how to think about it, how it's done. The first thing you do when you get a big project like this is to say, what is the purpose? What is the objective? You don't optimize until you know what you're trying to do. And what you're trying to do is get people a good retirement. When I say people, this is designed for working middle-class people. The poor have to be treated a different way, and those above middle class or upper middle class, that's a different set of groups for a different set of solutions. But this is the bulk of people, and this is global. Asia is aging much more than we are. China more than we are, Korea more than China, Taiwan and Singapore more than Korea. Everybody's in that area is aging. So this is a global challenge. How do you go about doing that? Well, once you've decided that what you first decide is, what's the objective? A good retirement. How do you define a good retirement? I don't know any of you. Well, I know a few of you, but I don't know you. But if you were to say to me, you're 20 years old, 25 years old, 30 years old, and you come to me and I say, you say, I want a good retirement. I say, all right, tell me what to do. My guess is you'll say, Professor, you're the one who's supposed to know this. I want a good retirement. I have a freaking clue what that means in terms of what I should do. And that's reasonable. You're building your careers. You shouldn't be thinking about retirement. It's not something that because you're not educated. This is true for my fabulous colleagues at MIT with 150 IQs, 3 degrees, nanotechnology. When you hand them a 401k thing and you say to them, here are 60 mutual funds past history, they all look at me and say, I don't know what the heck to do with this. Or worse yet, they think they know what to do with it and they do something really dumb. Okay? But that's for another story. Let me just go and say that the idea here is that we want a good retirement. A good retirement, I think, if I had to tell you, and you can always change it, is if you could live at the standard of living that you've come to enjoy in the latter part of your work life, and I could offer that you could continue to live at that standard of living for the rest of your life, that's a good retirement. We all like more, but I can tell you, any of you out there who think of mortgaging the future, because you think when you get to be that age, you aren't going to want to do anything, you don't need that much, big mistake. If you have your health and your brain, maybe one other thing, okay? Life is not that different. You're not going to want to roll over. And if you don't have your health, you need a lot of money. So let's put that away. Think of that as where you're going. Now, once you've decided that, how do I define a standard of living? If I wanted, is it a pot of money? No. Jane Austen, if you read Pride and Prejudice, I don't know if you read that anymore, but, what was the key job of her, the main character's mother? Checking out the men. Now, I know this sounds very terrible, but this is true at the time. And what would she say? Mr. Darcy was the good guy. She's the one everybody wanted. She never said Mr. Darcy was worth 200,000 pounds. What did she say? He's worth 10,000 a year. What was a millionaire? It wasn't someone who had £1 million. It was someone who had £1 million a year. Everything was defined as a perpetuity. Why? Because if I come here to San Francisco and I said, gee, I like to see the way you're living, and I said, I would embarrass you. I said, what would it take for me if I moved to San Francisco to live like him? I doubt you'd say $2,363,422 in the bank. You would tell me you have to be earning about this amount to live like him. I'm just underscoring to you, standard of living is defined by a stream of income and not by a pot of money. Now, that's understood in every retirement design except defined contribution plans, which is the way the world is going. 401ks and so forth, around the world. In DB plans and Social Security, they don't tell you what your pot is. They tell you how much you're going to get every year for the rest of your life. And how are you doing if I'm a corporation? How am I doing? What's my funded ratio? That's a measure of how much income I could buy with what we have in our fund now to how much we have promised to people. It's an income measure. Under the rules of the United States, I see 5 minutes back there, so we're going to get, this is going to be very short, but then this way you're off the hook in 5 minutes, okay. But what I want to, if I get nothing across to you in this, is to follow it. We are required in the industry to give you and my colleagues at MIT not only a bunch of past history of stuff that is useless to them, in fact, it frustrates them, but we have to report to you the balance value of your account, how much your account is worth. In fact, you can usually go on the computer and see whether it went up and down today and so forth. That's the wrong measure. What you're interested in for retirement is how much income you can have for retirement, sustained income, and if you want it for standard living, protected for inflation. That's not the same as the amount of money you have. If you have any doubt about that, 12 years ago, I could walk into any bank in this town, get a certificate of deposit, earn 4 or 5%. Right? On $1 million, that's $40,000 or $50,000 a year. That's a lot of money. Well, that's $1 million. What would I get, let's say 3 years ago, I'm looking at our sponsor, if I walked into that same bank with my $1 million, what would my income be? 10 basis points. That's 1/10 of 1%. $1,000 a year. So my advisor told me, I'm keeping you safe. I took your principal. I protected you through all the crises, Greece, everything, the big 208, 209, everything else. I'm there and I'm saying, well, that's very nice, but I used to get $40,000 or $50,000 a year. I'm getting $1,000 a year. That doesn't work for me. if I lost 98% of your money, in other words, I took your wealth from 50 to 1, you throw me in jail. If I was running your retirement, they would throw me in jail. If I take your income there, that's exactly what happened there. And yet that's measured as safe. Why? Because we're measuring the wrong thing. We kept the principal safe, where for retirement, it's the income that matters. And if you ask any retiree why they like a DB plan or Social Security, because they know they're going to get this income all the way through. So we have to change that. But this is just an example of where we are. We're making progress. This is not saying we're not working on this. We, collectively, government, everybody. But the regulations require me to show you things, teach you what is risky, teach you what is good and bad, by giving you information that is not relevant for this. It's the wrong measure of risk. If you measure risk, Ryan, you can't possibly manage it. That's the biggest message. Now, let me say in the last 4 minutes the rest of this. And it's part of a design criteria. Whenever you do a big project or build anything, first you decide the objective. Objective is to get a good retirement. We define what that is, a stream of income in retirement. Exactly what we've been doing in DB plans forever and professional investors. So this is not radical in terms of an idea, okay? And people love DB plans. I don't know of any employee group on the planet that has marched on their employer to get rid of the DB plan and replace it with DC, okay? So that's the goal. The question is, when you design the new DC design, the one that helps really address this problem, and it's not entirely the fault of the past. DC was never used for this purpose. It's being repurposed, okay? You have to have a set of design criteria. If you don't have the design criteria for a big project like this, and what I mean by that, a solution is not a solution unless it satisfies everything in the design criteria, not 6 out of 8, 100%. So you're very careful in what you pick, because in the real world, you're building something big. You have to have enormous amounts of flexibility, and you have to be absolutely flexible about everything else. But you have to have some invariants that you feel are critical to a solution. This is very important when you're building a big system and you're changing it. If you don't have those anchors, I promise you what you will end up doing is nothing. Because this person will say, oh, no, you can't do that. It will never work. And this group of people will never agree to that. And this is too expensive. And pretty soon, all of them go away. And the thing that everybody likes is what we're doing right now. But that's the way you design. So these are the ones, if you want to look. First, you should have a goal. And the goal should be an income goal, not a wealth goal. Second, your solution has to be robust, scalable, and low cost. Well, that sounds like apple pie. But there are a lot of strategies that work, but they don't work on a scale of 2 million people and $500 billion. They're not scalable. So you can't have a solution like hold nothing but hedge funds. They're not scalable, okay? Even if were a right thing. The third one is make sure that you measure risk, both regulatorily and in terms of teaching people by showing them the thing to look at, not by giving them a class, okay? That it's the volatility of their future income that matters. That's what they should look at. Yeah, you can show them how much they could get if they liquidated their account. You should put on page 4, not in the front. The fourth one is, all of you, as I mentioned already, it's well known. I was a trustee of CREF, which is a big retirement, and these are professors, research scientists. They're the most well-educated and curious people. They're scientists. Guess what they did when they signed up? They asked, what's everybody else doing? And then whenever they did an allocation, they never changed it. So from the beginning, long before there was any formal behavioral studies thing, I could have told you, if those people are doing it, you know that if you're going to design a system that works for people, it has to work well. Not work well. If you're never engaged, they do nothing. By the way, that makes it a pretty simple system if you do nothing. And simplicity for the consumer is always a good idea. And one of the big problems with DC is it looks like it makes life, and it can, very complicated for people who are never had to deal with these problems. So if you design it right, it should work well. My design criteria, I'm an extremist, but then I also like robustness. is the first time you have contact with the member is the day they retire. Now, that's extreme, but if I pick any other age, I'm not sure. If they become engaged earlier, that's easier. You understand? So if that's your design criterion, you know it's going to work. And by the way, everything I put up here for you in the last 4 minutes is doable. It's doable at low cost. It's doable with existing technology. So this is not a pipe dream someday out of an MIT lab 20 years from now. It is doable. Okay? There's nothing in here that isn't doable. Okay? And then that's the thing you do. So you make it work well. Customization. You've heard the thing, well, you know, the most popular thing to use for retirement default systems in DC these days is this thing called target date fund. And what it does is it says, I won't pick anyone's age, but okay, there's one. Okay. In 2060, when you retire, 265 maybe, you know, so you should buy the fund as 2060. And it sounds very good. It says, okay, that's what it is. Well, the only thing it's being judged on is your age. Well, I think, I saw your one. Yeah. Okay. Someone who's making $150,000 a year your age and someone who's making $50,000 a year are very different people, whatever your gender. Okay? One size, you know, average is okay, good enough. Okay, I see them. There are people here tonight wearing American size 6 shoe. And I know there are people here tonight wearing an American size 12 shoe. Why don't we just give everybody, turn their shoes in, and when you go out tonight, we'll give you all size 9. And think about it. Okay. The point is, it is possible today to have a system for 1 million people, or a very large number of people, where you never have any contact with them in the sense they make no decisions, and you set the goals not because you're paternalistic, because they don't know. In fact, probably most young people would say to me, what do I need to do to get a good retirement? So I said, fine, we'll just do it, and we don't bother to even talk to you about it because you won't talk to us anyway. Okay? So this is not paternalism. And what we'll do is we'll manage that to this goal in an optimal way, and we're going to change what we do for you if things about you are different from others. And that kind of customization can be done today at low cost. It's a trick. I mean, a trick, it takes skill. I don't mean it's trivial, but it can be done. Last few points, because I can see the light is going on, is we must be very careful that the system integrates all our retirement savings, assets dedicated to retirement. I'm not a financial planner. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about solving one problem, your retirement. So we look at all the dedicated. It turns out that you really need to look at all those assets. Remember, I'm going to do this without ever asking you any questions or asking for any information. So just don't think I got to get this from anybody. I get it, but okay. And if you don't do that, you can't do it right. The main reason is the biggest asset you have for retirement, most of you in this audience, is your future contributions. And that's very safe for this kind of thing. And that affects how much risk you can take in your portfolio. And without taking account of that, you can't possibly do it right. Last, and that's what I'm going to take 30 seconds more because this one goes, remember I mentioned about sending the 60 mutual funds past histories to my MIT colleagues? Are they supposed to be able to look at the past history and figure out which are the best funds to buy? If not, why are we sending it to them? No, I mean, really asking you is to step back and ask, why are you sending it to them? Because we have to send it to you. And you would reasonably say if it's sent to us, we're supposed to do something with it, including my colleagues. We pay people millions of dollars a year who have the skill to look at managers who have records in the past that everybody knows and figure out which ones are going to have good records in the future. What are the chances that anyone, it's not about education, in their spare time are going to be able to solve that problem in any meaningful way? It's a joke. I mean, it doesn't happen. So, here's my statement. Only give, once they get engaged, when they're not engaged, it doesn't matter. But once they get engaged, only give them meaningful information and meaningful choice. And I'll tell you a very, very fast story of what meaningful is different from important. Have you ever bought a car? All right, you're in the car business. You're buying a car. You're a car dealer right now. You've been to see her. Now you're coming to me. I'm a car dealer. You say, oh, you went to see her. She's great. She's honest as the day long. She's a lovely person. But all her engines have 9-to-1 compression ratios. All my engines have 9.31 compression ratios. Now, you're smart enough to know I'm selling them, right? So it must be higher compression ratio is good. I have a question for you, but the audience want to help him. How much does 3/10 of an improvement, 3/10 of a compression ratio unit do for your gas mileage, your 0 to 60 acceleration, the reliability of the engine, and what grade gasoline you have to use in your car? Okay, you heard I was an auto engineer, so I'm going to lean on that and tell you the following thing. Compression ratio is very important to all of those things. So the compression ratio is very important information. But as you've all demonstrated, it's totally meaningless to you and to everyone else. If you examine what we have to give you and what you often get from your financial service providers or your sponsors, most of what they give you, having nothing to do with your education, is meaningless. And most of the choices are also meaningless because the information that you would need to make those choices is meaningless to you. Rates of return, risk-return ratios, all these kinds of things, past histories, are you conservative, are you aggressive? Okay? It turns out that we can boil down this to one page if you go just to the meaningful choices, and therefore the meaningful information. If you have a goal for retirement, let's hold that fixed for a minute. You know, we set it for you, good retirement. You can change your goal, but let's just hold it. You look at your goal, and I tell you, you're not doing too well. Your chances of getting to your goal are not good. And you say, all right, what can I do about that? There are only 3 things you can do. Save more, work longer, or take more risk. If you have a 4th one, see me after the review. Yep. Okay, we're over. We're doing it. But, all right? And so the point being that she now distracted me. I'm sorry. Those are the only 3 things. A 4th one would be use the assets you have more efficiently. And that's a whole nother thing, but I will mention 2 of them. The annuity, a good one. A good version, not a bad version. Bad versions are always bad of even good things. Cars that don't work are not good, but cars are. Okay? Annuity and a reverse mortgage, as horrible as that name sounds. But they're bad versions, and we hope we make good ones. If we do, that's the only other thing. Therefore, 1 page. Your decision is, here's my goal, here's how I'm doing. If I'm not doing well, I can try to increase my saving. The good news is, if I save more, I'm doing better. The bad news is if I save more, my paycheck is smaller next month. That's meaningful. Secondly, if I move my age up, that I work longer. Same thing, good response. But then that's real to me too. Do I want to carry the bricks for another year, or do I want to spend that year doing bird watching, which is my passion? 3rd one, take more risks. That's a little harder, but there are ways to get people to understand. Okay? That's a one-liner. You notice I didn't mention one rate of return. I didn't mention an interest rate. I didn't mention anything. But those are the only things that are really meaningful when you boil it down, because those are the only things that you can control to get to that goal. Okay? Thank you very much, and I'm sorry to run over.
So for those of you, I mentioned at the beginning, option pricing is really what Professor Merton won the Nobel Prize for. And it was in the days at MIT, Fisher Black, Myron Scholes, and you working on this problem. Myron and Fisher came up with this idea of beta hedging, and they thought it could price an option, and you doubted it. And can you tell us a story from that moment on?
Oh, yeah, this is fun. It's like going to the dentist without Novocaine. No. Fisher and Myron worked together on this project, and I was working kind of in parallel. I've been working with Paul Simonson, but really it was a kind of the two of them and me. I can't take credit. I can't say the three of us invented all of this. It was a different process. And finally, Myron came to me and said, look, here's basically what we're doing. And I said, it doesn't seem to me it's likely to work because, well, for those of you who know, the payoffs of options are nonlinear and portfolios combine linearly, and so you can't hedge it perfectly. So then he showed me. I said, okay. So I took it home, and I had developed a different kind of mathematical model for portfolio analysis, for portfolio theory, for lifetime consumption, which made the abstraction from complex reality that you could trade continuously, literally continuously. Now, it sounds like an abstraction, but, practice follows theory. Because when I did that paper in the 1960s, things traded easily. Today, of course, things trade in milliseconds. That's pretty close to continuous. So it's getting more accurate. But my work I did using that assumption and the mathematics that went with it turned out to be very fruitful in portfolio theory. It produced lots of results. So it was natural to take what they showed me. They had this idea that they could create a portfolio between the stock, cash, and the option, that if they did it right, they could get rid of what's called a systematic risk. I'm sorry to put jargon in, but that's, for those, since I'm already there, create a zero beta portfolio, and then they know the expected return. There's an equilibrium theory of pricing. That's as much as I can say. And I looked at this thing, and I took what they did, and I applied it I said, what happens if you can keep trading more and more frequently? And then I came back to them, and I said, I was wrong, you're right, but for a different reason. And I said, you don't get rid of, yes, you do get rid of the beta risk, the systematic risk. But actually, if you do this, you get rid of all the risk. And why that was important was it meant that if you can get rid of all the risk, it has to be, at least in theory, that you can trade the stock and the cash and exactly replicate the payoff to that option. That's the only way you can get zero risk. And that became a production theory of option pricing. It was a way to produce an option if it didn't exist. It gave the pricing, but the price wasn't the price that you would pay, it's your production cost. It was more of a manufacturing theory. This is how much you would have to put into the pot and then run the technology to have what come out of the other end be an option. So it was really a production theory. Now, it could be a price theory, for those of you who remember microeconomics, under pure competition, price equals marginal cost, but that's a very specific assumption. So that's the answer. The answer was, I came back, I said, you're right.
And how did they react? What did you guys do? Did you go and party?
No, I was pretty happy. I thought it was a pretty exciting result because first of all, it meant that I didn't have to believe in the capitalistic pricing model. No disrespect, but it's a particular model. And if I had to have the particular model they use because it's an equilibrium model, someone would say, that's very nice, professor, but I don't believe in that model. But this was a production theory. It said, I don't even need equilibrium. This is how I can manufacture this thing, and this is the cost to a low-cost producer for creating options. It became a more robust theory because technically it was a necessary condition for every equilibrium model. So, of course, it gave you the right answer from any equilibrium model, including the one they used. Now, I think it's about as far as we should take that, but if you get the spirit of it, and that's actually the way it's been done on Wall Street or around the world for 45 years. Okay.
Let's go to the Nobel Prize. How did your life change after the Nobel Prize?
Well, that's a very fair question, and I'll say this may sound a little strange. It changed less for Myron and me, who shared it, than for most of our classmates from physics, Stephen Chu, who was Secretary of Energy, and so forth, because we had already been kind of in the public. Because we were in finance and we'd been there. I even I'm just telling you, this is not name dropping, it's just bizarre. I can tell you, I gave a lecture on derivatives to Queen Elizabeth in the drawing room of Buckingham Palace before I got the prize. Okay, we'll leave that one alone. And it's only to give you some of the bizarre things. What I meant by is we had a lot of access to the world. We worked on, our stuff was being used and we were open. So we had a bigger pulpit than the typical physicist or typical economist. So, of course, that's one of the great things about the Nobel Prize. And it's still, and this is now I've said what I said, I framed it. But even with that, I will tell you that the biggest thing it does for me, other than getting it, because it's the best thing that if you're a scientist and and again, I will say this, you have to understand about these prizes. You have to be lucky. Because they give one a year for the whole world, you have to be alive. But think about it. There are hundreds of people's work that if they were announced, you'd say, yeah, that was reasonable. But only one's going to get it. And there are always new people coming along. So when you say, my mentor, Paul Samuelson, wrote a paper called All the People I Would Give Nobel Prizes to in Economics, because he was realizing there are many more people who won't get the prize than who could satisfy it. So anyone who tells you, I knew I was going to get it, good luck, but I think you have to just say it also takes some luck. But the main thing it's given me is I can literally see anybody in the world. It's really true. This is not me, this is because of that. And that's very important. It isn't just for purposes of, hey, isn't it fun to meet interesting people? But rather, it gives you access. And I'm not talking about so much public access to, you get out and you talk like I'm giving tonight. I'm talking about you can see just about anybody in the world. They'll see you. You have to have a reason, but but they will. I can't tell you a story, but I'm saying, so that's actually probably the best. But the recognition, there's no price to put on that if you're a scientist. I don't know what it means. It's just.
You mentioned Paul Samuelson. For those who don't know, Paul Samuelson won the Nobel Prize in 1970. He's the father of modern economics in a way,
Right.
And he was your advisor. What advice did he give you that helped you in your career?
Well, we could talk a long time, but he was the first American to win the Economics Prize, and everybody knew he was going to win it eventually. And he was one of the most important economists of the 20th century. And if anybody had studied economics in the 20th century, they probably used his textbook. Very unusual to have a scientist of his quality write the best-selling textbook. Okay. Any case. Well, the first thing he did is, when I went into economics, I started trading. I bought my first stock when I was 11, and I traded everything under the sun while I was in school. People took me in and taught me about the markets when I was a kid, and I read the tapes, and then I traded convertible bonds and everything else. And I thought it was really cool, but I always thought that was an after-hours activity. I never really thought I could have a day job doing that in academia. And the first thing Paul taught me was that when I met him, I knew no economics when I got into the department. That's another story. He taught me that the areas like the stock market, risk, warrants, that was a perfectly acceptable field of inquiry for academic research at the highest levels. And that was a thrill for me. I said, wow. My day job and my night job can be, the thing I like to do and the thing I want to do is there. And it really, so that was one of it. And then the other is, by example. He never told me what to do. And for some reason, we really got along well from the beginning. And he treated me, everybody was scared of him. I guess I was foolish enough not to be. So anyway. But he was great. He stretched me and gave me experiences that made me be able to deal with almost anything. But, he didn't have any rule that he told me to follow. We just did it.
What about a lesson that you learned from a family member that has helped you in your career or your life?
Well, that's always a hard one. Because, if your parents raise you, they've been doing that the whole time. But my parents, they both were important to me. My father, who was a very eminent sociologist, an academic scholar, and I were very close later in my life. And but my mother, my answer, I'll give you one my mother taught me, which has been very useful. When I was a little kid, we had the Cubist sculptor, Jacques Lipschitz, had his foundry in the little town we lived in. And he would do these huge sculptures, Pegasus or something. And I'm a kid looking at these things. I said, it didn't mean anything to me. I'm sorry. I mean, now I have a little better appreciation, but they did. And I said to my mother the equivalent of, is this a joke? Can he really do it? And so she took me and she said, let me take you. She took me to see the busts, the heads that he had done in bronze of real people. And it was incredible. You could, every expression, it was the most real. And so she said this. And then she said to me, you learned something from this. You see, you doubted that what he was doing was serious or that he could do otherwise. But when you saw that he could do this perfect, when I say perfect, capture the personality of the person, sculptures, then you had the appreciation. She said, the lesson is, if you want to do things, show people that you can do it their way as good as anyone, maybe better. Then you can do it your way, and nobody can argue with you. And that's served me very well.
That's an amazing lesson. Is there, I'm really asking a lot of advice questions. Is there a piece of advice you wish someone had told you?
I've thought about that too. As years go by, I'm, knock on wood, I feel very blessed because I'm living a wonderful life right now. I feel my whole life has been blessed, but I'm having a fabulous time. And I've learned an awful lot just by living. And I sort of go through the experiment. What if I could have known what I know now? I don't mean events like what happened to the stock market. I just mean about life. If I could have known that when I was in my 20s or 30s, and say in my 20s, and I said, that'd be great. Then I thought about it a little more, and I said, that would be very lonely because all the people around me wouldn't be able to relate to me at all. So I guess my answer is I can't think of anything really that I wish someone had told me about life. And I really do believe that you can tell people things. I never, for example, whenever I go to a country or anything and I give talks or anything and design things, I never say I'm telling you this is what you should do. Some of my colleagues like to frame it that way, but I don't. I said, first of all, you're not going to pay any attention to somebody. I don't even live in your country, or I've been in your country 5 times. Why would you take advice from anybody? I always say, I'm come here to show you something. And I show them, just like you'd say, here's a white elephant, you find it interesting. I show them things. And then I say to them 2 things. If something you've seen you like, take it, it's yours. Take all the credit for it, but take all the responsibility. And I find that worked because of the idea that you're not trying to tell people what to do, particularly when you're not in a position to really be able to, you don't have the data. You don't know enough to do it. But if you do this device, you find you get the things that really kind of come back and people will respond to it. So maybe I didn't answer your question.
No, I think you did. And you touched upon something. Finance, option pricing theory was a very exciting time in finance. And some people think that, there's not been much going on in finance and economics over the last 30 years. So, first of all, you can comment on that. The other question is, what do you think economists and finance people should work on today that is very important? And you've mentioned one, retirement. But what else?
Oh, well, no small questions here. Well, I think a couple of things. We can all be very critical of our field and should be. That's how we get better. And that's how we avoid getting fat heads about the things and knowing limits. But I think sometimes we're very impatient, including me. And we measure things in time scales that are not appropriate. It turned out, as I think I indicated in my lecture, that it was a certain coincidence of luck that the research we did that turned out to, applied to everything. If you think about it, options is just another word for flexibility. You have the choice. So you can use options to understand value and address the drug discovery phasing. You can use it to figure out why you would pay more to build a multi-fuel plant, which costs more to build and is less efficient to run, because you have the options. Okay? So you build modularly rather than a single thing, even though it's more expensive and less efficient. You suddenly realize that options are surrounding us in every kind of way. And also, options are insurance. And you don't have to be in the insurance business, and you don't have to be talking about insuring your car to realize that insurance is a critical element in our life. We're managing our risk. How do we do that as a group, as a society, as individuals? So all of this happened just at the right time. Now, why I say that is, it turned out we did something that really had a big impact, and it had enormous knock-ons. And it still goes on. You can't expect that to happen too often. You say, this isn't about me or Myron or Fisher, that somehow we were so brilliant that, you have to wait for another one to come along. It was a combination of events, okay? Look, anyone who doubts, anyone who tells you they made it themselves, it's just not telling you the truth. Everybody needs luck. Sometimes it's bad luck, but everybody needs good luck. No, but you need good luck. And sometimes bad luck ends up giving you something that you didn't plan on. But in any case, it's good. But you need luck. Now, that said, let me just, before we leave that, say, what is not luck is what you do when you're presented with an opportunity. So we all go through life. You get a piece of luck, you run into somebody, some situation presents itself, a good situation. That's luck. I get it, you get it, you get it. However, what do you do when you're presented with that instance? Do you seize the opportunity and use it, or do you let it go by? That's not luck. So I always find that people work harder and smarter tend to be luckier. But I do want to make it very clear, there isn't this deterministic thing that if we had brilliant people, that's what does it. I don't believe that. I believe it's a much more complex process in that sense. So the long answer is to make the point that I don't want to make a judgment whether 6 things that have been done in finance or economics are as good or better than in the past than this was. This was an extraordinary period. But part of the reason it was an extraordinary period is you saw what happened. There was need. It's like the ever debate. Was the leader fantastic because the leader was that one person, or was the leader fantastic because they happened to be in the seat when the events were such, and they knew how to seize the information, and they were good? So there's no question they were good or smart and capable, but were they uniquely, that's what I'm trying to respond. So I really can't give you more than that because some things take longer. And, all of this was done. Finance wasn't even a science till the 1950s. And I would mark the man's work, happened to be a man's work, that I would call the beginning of modern, mating in science, was Harry Markowitz's portfolio theory in 1952. Kenneth Arrow, who just passed away 2 days ago, the youngest Nobel Prize winner in economics, and brilliant guy, nice guy, 95, but great guy. His paper on risk ratings, also 1952. Okay, I marked that as the beginning of the science. Now, until 2 days ago, those 2 people were alive and working. And Ken at 95 was still working, and Parry in his 90s is still working. Now, in terms of a human being, that's a long time, from 1952, right? That's forever. In terms of a science, it's a young science. How many discoveries do you want? We have 6. There are, depending on how you want to measure it, there are 6 to 8 Nobel Prizes that have been given in economics, in finance. That's a pretty big number in a field that didn't exist as a science until the 1950s, period. So are they doing well or better? I don't know. I agree. I can look back on the event. I agree that what happened back then was pretty amazing. But I don't think you'd want to go so far as to say we aren't going anywhere. And, tomorrow, maybe we'll have one.
Might happen.
Yeah.
Okay, they've told us we have 5 minutes, so we have time for a couple more things,
Sure.
and then the dean will ask the last question. So we talked about Fisher Black tonight. I think everyone knows who he was. Myron Scholes, you mentioned another person, Harry Markowitz. These are all central people in modern finance. So, and let's keep it to one sentence. One sentence. We could even do one word. One word or one sentence, you choose. I name the person, the thought that comes to your mind. Fisher Black.
1930s gentleman.
Myron Scholes.
Good friend. Very sensible when it comes to dealing with the real world. I trust his judgment.
Paul Samuelson.
Incredibly prolific. The last universal economist.
Bill Sharp, who invented the capital asset pricing model.
Loves what he does and is still doing it.
Eugene Fama.
Empirically driven, even his theories. Probably the most unbiased or most, I don't want to call honest, because that would sound like everybody else dishonest. But rather, just in terms of scientific research in finance, you don't have to agree with but in terms of, how he looks at things, first to say I'm wrong or right, or show me the data. That's how I think of him. That's more than one word. But.
It was 2 sentences, 3 sentences.
Yeah.
John. So you mentioned early Vanguard. One of the pioneers of Vanguard, the index fund, the S&P 500, is John Bogle, just for the audience. So John Bogle.
No, the implementer.
Okay. And finally, your father, Robert K. Merton.
Wow. Best friend for 40 years. We knew each other longer. The last 40 years, we were best friends. And probably the most influential person in my life.
So my last question is, out of all your accomplishments, what are you most proud of and why?
It's like asking best foods. I could tell you on my publications which work. I think my work that I did actually as a graduate student on dynamic portfolio theory and optimization was the most creative thing I did and most important, because it was that allowed me to do everything else in a way. And it was the most, when I look back at it as if it weren't me, I think that was pretty cool. So on the professional side, I think after 47 years of teaching, I love teaching, I still do, that all the students, and they're working with them, and they come back and see them, and that's I consider that a very big accomplishment. I purposely haven't got in, my children and all these other. I'm talking about, but the things that you're really talking about. I would say there was some of my research. I've done some pretty decent stuff, but that was the best, my favorites, and then the students. I think of a university where we are as having 3 roles: knowledge creation, that's research; knowledge dissemination, that's education; and knowledge storage. I think that's the way I think of the tradition of the university. And I've referred to the first 2. I don't know if I do much storing.
And now Dean Davis will ask the last question.
Sure.
Thank you. This evening, we're populated by so many students. And so my last question, Professor Merton, to you is, what 3 pieces of advice would you give to students at USF to make sure and ensure success in their careers?
Well, I can never assure. I just got through telling you about luck.
Luck being one of them. That's one piece of
okay,
advice.
then there are 4 ways to improve your retirement: save more, work longer, take risk, and then be lucky. Okay, so no, my 3 would, First, I would say pursue your passion. I tell my own children that. I tell every student I have. I've lucky. I say, and if I hire people professionally, particularly in the non-academic part of my life, I always choose passion. Yeah, at the margins, I always choose passion because I know people who are passionate about it. It's the first thing they think about when they get up in the morning, the last thing at night. And in a competitive world with really good people, you can't beat that. If you have another agenda in life, I think that. So pursue your passion, and of course that means comparative advantage too. Probably your passion is what you do well. The second thing I'd say is think of your activity, what you do, that you're in the solution business. First, I'll point out to you that if you are in the solution business, you're never going to be unemployed because people always need things solved, okay? But that has an implication because your orientation is someone has a challenge or problem. I'm in a solution. My job is to find a solution for you, not to get a product and convince you it's a solution. That's okay. I'm not putting that down. But I believe, and more, that the world is going to be looking for people who provide solutions to their problems, not problems we tell them they have that we have an answer to. I'm saying, and if you look at it, and what goes with that is that be proud of what you do, be proud of what you produce, okay? In other words, build it right. And this is not apple pie and get trust. If you can get the trust asset, it'll be incredibly valuable to you. And I remind you, we usually think of trust as trustworthy. Not good enough. Trust has 2 parts to it. Trustworthy, you're going to operate in the interest of the person, but you also need competency. A fool can bury you as quickly as a knave. That's why the system of family as the institutions instead of government or private sector is limited. Because if you got to pick someone from the family, it's unlikely you have the best brain surgeon or the best financial advisor in the family. You have to be a pretty big family. So they may be trustworthy, but they may not be competent. So trust, I believe, is going to be a ever greater value. And why I mention that is because of that. Okay, and then I had a third one. Think about creating social capital. And social capital, I'll put it in a very simple way. If you ever get particularly involved and you're doing well and you're always going to have times when you slip. Nothing really you did wrong or didn't do wrong on purpose, but you get sued, someone comes after you, or something like that. If you build social capital, and I think you can all think of people in finance who have social capital, people in the system say, no, don't go after that person. Not because of connections. This is a good person. They're doing the right thing. So they grab you. If you don't have social capital, and you're powerful, people will let up to you. But if you slip, no one will push you. I mean, sometimes that happens, but no one has to push you. Because sooner or later, you're going to slip. The difference is if you don't have the social capital, when you slip, you fall. And you end up in jail, or you end up losing everything. Okay? So social capital is real. And it's a good thing. It's not about connections. It's not about bribery. It's about you build social capital with people. It's something you can draw on, just like all the other kinds of capital you have. Those are the 3.
Thank you. What a wonderful way to end, especially on this note. Thank you so much to both of you for tonight's presentations.